Sorry for the slight delay. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of traffic and parking issues today. It is Wednesday, May 11th, 2011 at 9:07 a.m. and this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is now in session. Ms. Rowe, any public comments?
No items.
Item 3, adoption of the minutes of the CRRMA board meetings of April 13th, 2011. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those?
Yes, move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 4, presentation on the El Paso Regional Ports of Entry Operations Plan by the Texas Department of Transportation and project consultants. And today we have Mark Tomlinson and Jim Brogan from Cambridge. Jim, welcome. Look forward to your presentation today.
Thanks, and nothing you haven't seen already. But good to see you, members of the board. Good to see you, Jim Brogan, Cambridge Systematics project manager for the Port of Entry Operations Plan. So, as some of you know, we've been at this for about 13 months, just a little over a year. We're about 2 weeks from finalizing the report and finalizing everything by the end of the month. So we're actually currently in public meetings now. The deck of slides that I'll walk you through now is the same deck of slides we're walking through the public at our public meetings on. So I'm happy to entertain any questions as we go through it. It talks a little bit about our what we were asked to do, the approach that we took over the last 12 to 13 months to accomplish what we were asked to do. Talk about our initial findings, both kind of in general and the recommendations that we're moving forward to the region, and talk about the next steps that we're taking to bring this thing in for a landing over the next couple weeks. So lots of folks have different recollections about what we were asked to do, so I always find it useful to remind everyone about exactly what we were asked to do, because I have a very clear memory on this topic at least. So what we were asked to do is review all the existing ports of entry within the region. Our study region runs from Santa Teresa down to the new crossing at Tornillo. So 5 existing crossings, ultimately 6 crossings in the region. Assess the degree to which that system of crossings can handle current demand as well as future demand. So we did a demand projection out to 2035. So assessing how they can handle future demand, how they can handle existing demand, both individually at the individual crossing level and as a system. So very important to understand if you make an improvement to one crossing, what does that do to the rest of the system? So individually and as a system, both currently and looking out to the future, out to 2035. We looked at a number of different operational scenarios to assess the degree to which we could squeeze additional capacity out of this existing system and make the system that you've got work better. And hopefully the idea here was use the system that you've got to see if you could make operational improvements to the system to handle this future demand looking out to 2035. And so we've got some immediate, short, midterm recommendations focused on operations that we're going to be providing to the region over the next several weeks. So the key message here is looking at the existing system, trying to maximize the use of that existing system, and focusing on operational improvements to wring out additional capacity from the system that you've already got. We took essentially a 4-step approach, boiled it down to kind of 4 boxes here. There's obviously a lot more technical activity than went behind this, but we assessed existing conditions, and I'll walk you through kind of what we did step by step here. Described existing conditions, went through a process to identify potential solutions. What are some ideas to make the system of crossings that you've got operate a little more efficiently? We evaluated those, tested and evaluated those solutions to separate the potentially good ideas from the potentially bad ideas, and we're at the point now where we're developing and presenting recommendations for regional leadership to implement. All of this was supported by a fairly intense public and stakeholder outreach process, fed into each one of these elements from the beginning of our process about a year ago through the middle of the process as we were really in the thick of our technical work, and now we're at the point where we're finalizing everything and another set of outreach processes that we're undertaking to make sure that the recommendations we're moving forward seem to make sense and can be implemented within the region. So just kind of walking you through what that looked like step by step, taking that first box, describing the existing conditions. As I mentioned, we did a number of outreach activities throughout the course of our work, really designed to do 2 things. A, understand the issues and the challenges facing the border crossings and how they're currently being used, how they might be used in the future, from a number of different perspectives, and I'll get into that in a second. So that was one piece. The other piece was to generate some ideas and some thoughts from the users of the system about how you can make the system work better. So understand existing conditions and how they're being used, and generate some ideas about how to make that system work a little better. Several different components of that process. One was a public opinion survey, 1,000 residents at the very beginning of our process, randomly selected residents, both sides of the border, just to get a sense of what are the issues, what are the challenges, what are some ideas to make the system work better. Supplemented that with targeted interviews and focus groups with the heaviest users of the system and the folks that have the most to gain or lose by investments in the system. So with the shipper carrier community, the Maquila community, had detailed discussions with them, the downtown business folks that see a lot of their revenue from cross-border traffic, the neighborhoods and the crossers that are most impacted by what happens at the border. So supplemented the random assortment of thoughts we got with some very targeted interviews of the heaviest users of the system, and then supplemented that with a number of ongoing public meetings and stakeholder briefings throughout the process. Again, all designed to help us understand current conditions and what are the issues and what are the challenges, and generate some ideas about how to make the system of crossings work a little better. So 3 different lenses that we took to view, through which to view what's going on at the crossings. As I mentioned, we did test and evaluate all the different solutions that we got. We did that through an operational model that we developed that was built on a lot of the information that already existed in the region. The MPO's modeling platform was used. We supplemented that with some information from TxDOT, some information from Customs. It took a fairly long and detailed process to develop that model, calibrate it, make sure it was valid and kind of reflected existing conditions, and it was suitable for us to use to evaluate what the good ideas were and what the bad ideas were. So fairly significant effort over the first 6 to 8 months of our process to collect that information, develop it, and synthesize it within this model. And finally, the third big piece of technical analysis was a number of kind of research activities to describe both current and future population factors and trends and issues, socioeconomic trends and issues, industry trends and issues, both regionally, nationally, internationally, all the things that feed into our travel demand forecast and our forecast to 2035 about how the bridges might be used in the future. So a number of different activities designed to kind of help us understand what the factors were to feed into this future demand forecast. So the next thing was the next box in that list was the identification of potential solutions. As I mentioned, we use the public outreach and the stakeholder outreach process to help us not only understand the issues and challenges of the border now, but also to generate some ideas and thoughts about how to make that system of crossings work better. So we tried to cast as wide a net as we could to understand and just collect all the different ideas that folks had out there. So not only through our public outreach and our stakeholder outreach process, but also a review of existing plans and studies done by TxDOT, done by the MPO, done by the city. We brought our own ideas to the table based on our experience, both on the northern border and on the southern border, of ideas we thought might work. And after that process over 2 to 3 months, we ended up collecting somewhere between 150 and 160 individual projects, strategies, or initiatives that folks thought might make the system of crossings work better. While we would have loved to evaluate all of those, we had somewhat limited budget and time to do that. So we went through a process which is described on the right-hand side here to winnow the 150 or 160 ideas down to a more manageable level. Ended up with 22 scenarios from the 150 projects, 22 scenarios that we moved forward and evaluated within the operational model that we developed. So wide net, 150, 160 ideas, ultimately about the end of the summer into the fall, grouped into scenarios and winnowed down to 22 that we could test. The 22 scenarios kind of came in 4 flavors. We looked at a number, 5 or 6 crossing management types of ideas. These were all about could you improve the efficiency of the crossings by adding Customs and Border Protection staff there? Could you improve the crossings by extending hours of operation for either for commercial movements or for passenger movements or for both? So 5 or 6 what we consider to be crossing management ideas that we evaluated. We looked at a number of technology solutions, building on the technology applications that already exist in the region. Idea here being, are there technology applications and they're providing information to folks or to customs agents that can make the crossings more efficient and allow us to maximize the capacity that you've got. We looked at a number of pricing scenarios with an eye toward smoothing demand across the various crossings, not with an eye toward revenue generation, really with from a transportation operations and a transportation demand management perspective. So through pricing signals, could you send pricing signals to allow people to make different choices and potentially smooth the demand and even out the demand across the system of crossings. So we looked at 3 or 4 of those, and a number of traffic engineering or infrastructure improvements, some minor, some major, primarily designed to improve the efficiency and improve the performance of the approach networks to the crossings themselves. So could you improve the efficiency of the system by untangling what goes on at some of the approach networks to individual crossings? So again, we used a suite of modeling tools, calibrated modeling tools that we developed to help us understand what was, of these 22 scenarios, what looked promising, what looked like good ideas, and what looked like possibly bad ideas. And just quickly, in terms of how we evaluated those scenarios, we started with the 22 scenarios in the 4 different flavors that we came up with. We were really looking for two key pieces of output from the modeling tools that we developed. One on the left-hand side of your screen there is one of the key pieces of output is looking at delay times at individual crossings. So the tools that we developed allow us to measure what we consider to be actual wait times, which is from the moment you enter the back of the line, the back of the queue, to the moment you are released by customs going northbound. That was what we consider to be wait time. So we can evaluate that, we can measure that, and for each individual scenario, we can look at, does this scenario improve wait times, make them lower? Does it make wait times worse? Does it have no effect? We found in some cases out of the 22, some of the ideas actually made wait times worse. So we tossed those out and wanted to focus obviously on the most promising scenarios. The other thing that we looked at, not only individual crossings, but on the right-hand side, we wanted to assess what the impact was to the system of crossings. So the example I use here is when you toll. One of the ideas that we looked at was, what if you put a toll on the Bridge of the Americas? Would that be able to? Would you be able to smooth demand across the region and make all the bridges work better if you toll to that crossing? So when you do that within our models, you can see very clearly when you look at the Bridge of the Americas, volumes go down, wait times go down, queue lengths go down. When you look at the Bridge of the Americas in a vacuum, it looks like a tremendous strategy for improving the operation of that crossing. When you look at the impact to the rest of the system, particularly at Zaragoza, and you see wait times go through the roof and volumes go through the roof, and that happens not only at Zaragoza but other crossings, all the benefits that you get at Bridge of the Americas are completely washed away by the disbenefits you get everywhere else. So where that happens, where you've got possibly positive impacts at one bridge but significantly negative impacts everywhere else in the system, we toss those ideas out as well. So in several times that happened over the course of the 22 scenarios. So what we're looking at, of the 22 scenarios that we started with, 8 or 9 showed somewhat positive benefits. They were promising. Either had very positive benefits at the individual crossing level, or had very positive system benefits. So from the 22 that we started with, 8 or 9 looked like they were looking pretty good and could make some sort of a difference. Went through a process over the last month or so where we coupled those together. If you can put 2 or 3 things together in a package, if you can increase staff, add some technology, add a lane? Would you be able to wring out even more capacity from the system? So we went through a process where we could package these things together. Ultimately, that became the core of our recommendations that we're bringing forward to the region over the last couple weeks. And we're pairing those recommendations. We're not kind of just presenting those in a vacuum either. We're pairing those with implementation activities with the hope that with pairing them with other strategies will make these things actionable and can give the region a path forward to actually implement these recommendations. So we spelled out some roles and responsibilities, who should be responsible, of all the different agencies and entities involved in the crossings, who should be the lead agency, who are the supporting agencies, how can we make this happen, any policy actions that might be required, spell those out, how do you pay for this stuff, are there funding and financing approaches that might be appropriate to pay for some of these recommendations, and are there education and outreach activities that might be paired to make sure that these things can actually be acted upon. So ultimately, 22 scenarios, boil them down to a number of recommendations that we pair with implementation activities with the hope that they can that they don't sit on the shelf and they actually can move forward over the next several years. So that was our process, just in terms of what's the red meat, what are our findings here and what are we moving forward with in terms of findings and recommendations. I think it's useful, first of all, to just talk in general about our findings, and I'll get into the kind of specific recommendations that we're making. So what we're finding when we go through this process is, as I mentioned, our operational model allows us to look at individual crossings and individual lane types within those crossings. So we can assess what happens on a fast lane versus a general purpose commercial lane, a passenger lane versus a dedicated commuter lane. So we can tell what's going on at individual lane types within all the individual crossings within the region. What we're finding is that some lane types at some crossings, particularly your busiest crossings, are either already at or are very close to approaching what we consider to be operational capacity, and we define that as during an average day, but the peak hour of that average day, so the busiest hour within any given average day within a year. If those wait times within that hour are 60 minutes for commercial movements or 2 hours for passenger movements, we consider that to be at operational capacity. So there are several lane types within several of the crossings already today that are at this threshold, at this what we consider to be almost an operational failure mode. If nothing is done, that second bullet, if nothing is done, so if the operations of the crossings stay exactly the same as they are now, the only thing that changes is the volumes moving or wanting to move across those crossings. If nothing is done but the volumes increase, the entire system will reach this operational capacity mode within the next 25 years. And the busiest bridges within the region, the Bridge of the Americas and Zaragoza, will reach this operational capacity threshold within the next 10 years. So you've got pieces of the system that are already at capacity the way we've measured it. If nothing is done, the entire system reaches that place within the next 25 years, and the heaviest bridges, the most heavily used bridges will get there sooner rather than later. And the third bullet is also important. There's no magic bullet here. I mean, if the region makes all the operational improvements that we're going to recommend over the next several months. Even if you did everything tomorrow, significant delays are going to remain for passenger movements and commercial movements. So key message here, you've got a system that's approaching failure. Some bridges are getting there sooner rather than later. And even if you do everything operationally that you could reasonably do, you're still going to have some pretty significant delays for passenger movements and for freight movements.
Can you define significant for us, please?
Well, significant at these thresholds, at or above these 60-minute or 120-minute thresholds. What we're finding is there are even in the out years, the general purpose lanes, so the non-fast lanes and the non-DCL lanes, are at those thresholds. Those special purpose lanes, the fast lanes or the DCL lanes, are under those thresholds, so they still work okay, but the rest of the system is at those thresholds. So that's what we found kind of in general, clearly some important findings there. In terms of the operational improvements that we will recommend that we think can make a difference, particularly in the short term, and not completely solve every problem, obviously, but allow you to kind of kick the can down the road a little bit in terms of when these bridges fall into this operational capacity threshold. One recommendation is, our first recommendation is to extend commercial hours of operation at Bridge of the Americas and at Santa Teresa, moving from a 12-hour commercial day at both of those crossings to a 20-hour commercial day. So a commercially focused recommendation, but one that has both commercial benefits to the commercial travelers and the commercial traffic, but also passenger travelers as well. You know, getting some of the trucks out of that mix will help the passenger movements there as well. So a somewhat short-term fix there. The second bullet is our second recommendation is our most important recommendation, also the most difficult to implement, is the working with the various congressional delegations to add Customs and Border Protection staff at all of the crossings. That's something that all of the recommendations that we are moving forward really depend on having adequate inspection staff to process these vehicles. The issue that Customs has is even with the proposed 2012 federal budget, which increases their staffing levels, even with that, they're 400 to 500 officers below their 2007 levels. So they're not even really at their authorized levels in terms of inspection capabilities or capacity, much less thinking about adding staff. So very important recommendation, very challenging to implement. We're hopeful that the information that we're providing to the region will help further the discussions that are happening in D.C. about this particular issue, because a lot of the stuff that we recommend, it really depends on having staff at the crossings to move folks through. Third recommendation is purely a policy recommendation, which is to combine and co-locate the federal and state commercial motor vehicle safety inspections, which are essentially they do the same thing. One is done by FMC, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration staff. That's the federal inspection. The state inspection is done by Texas DPS staff. Essentially, they're doing the same thing. We're recommending to combine and co-locate those inspections. That happens already in New Mexico. That happens in Arizona. So there's a precedent there. Has some system benefits, particularly for those trucks that are unlucky enough to have to do both at any given time. So purely a policy recommendation there. The next recommendation we're making is, and we're working on a better acronym for this, but for now we're calling it the Border Traveler and Cargo Information System. And this is the technology application that we tested. And essentially what this thing does is it builds on all the various pieces of technology that are in place now, Secure Origins piece, the infrastructure that TxDOT and the city already have in terms of travel information, the work that the Texas Transportation Institute is doing on RFID at Bridge of the Americas in Zaragoza. And essentially what the Border Travel and Cargo Information System does is build on those those applications that exist already and provide very similar information to two different audiences. It provides what we consider to be real wait time information and real queue length information to travelers, either through the highway advisory radio or message signs or on their smartphones, well upstream of where that information is provided now, to allow them to make different bridge choices to the degree that they have a choice. So provide information to travelers to affect bridge choices to the degree that they have bridge choices. Provide the same information, wait time information and queue length information to Customs staff to allow them to better allocate their resources. So currently, essentially the way that Customs staff determines how long the queue length is they kind of stick their head out the window and see if they can see the back of the line. The way they figure out wait times is they ask travelers about wait times. So we want to provide a little more rigor to that process and provide them what we consider to be real information that they can use to determine when it's appropriate to put another officer on the line or better allocate their resources. So message here is relatively small investment to build on the systems that you've already got in place and provide that information and be able to make those bridges across the system work a little bit more effectively.
Jim, what kind of investment would it take to do this?
It's somewhere between $2 and $3 million total. So about a very small investment initially, somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 to put a detailed concept of operations together and begin to kind of look at vendors to piece this thing together, and then another couple million to actually purchase the equipment, install it, do all that, do the actual install. So fairly small investment. I know the city is already investigating funding sources at the federal level to begin that process. It's a competitive pool that they're trying to compete in, but relatively small investment, all things considered, but something that can happen pretty quickly, and we're moving it forward as an immediate action item.
So is that only on the city bridges?
That would be that cost would be for all 6 bridges. Yeah, both sides.
But it wouldn't make a difference if they don't make the choice to add an agent up ahead, right?
Because
they often don't.
Right.
They know that there is traffic backed up 3 or 4 hours. They just don't make the choice to open the additional lanes.
It would certainly, if you could couple that with added staff, it would certainly make it better. But it's what it does do is provide actual wait time information. So if wait times at Santa Teresa are 20 minutes and wait times at Bridge of the Americas is 2 hours. And you can't, and Santa Teresa has a logical choice. You can know that and make that choice. Whereas now you're just it's a guessing game. But certainly all the recommendations that we make work an order of magnitude better when you've got when the booths are fully staffed. Absolutely.
What are dynamic mobility solutions? I saw that on the previous slide. FHWA, CTIP. What is that exactly?
It's essentially commercially focused traveler information. It's manifest information that's provided electronically. It's electronic customs and brokers information. It's a number of different pieces that Federal Highway is actually op testing in a number of different places right now. So the CTIP is their first operations test that they're doing nationally. It's in Kansas City, and it's a combination of traveler information, manifest information, kind of route guidance. It's all stuff that's kind of packaged together. So Federal Highway is making a pretty big push to look at these types of investments and op test them. So CTIP is the first. They're looking at a similar doing something similar in Florida in the next several months. They're looking at doing something very similar in Seattle in the next couple of months as well. So it's kind of a combination of strategies. The CTIP being the first stands for Crosstown Improvement Project.
And this is specifically looking at ports, the southern port or the northern border, or you said Seattle or Florida?
Well, what they're trying to do is op test different technologies in different places where they're trying to solve different problems. So the Crosstown Improvement Project was more about route guidance than anything else, and it was op tested in Kansas City. The Seattle project, as I understand it, will be relate more to cross-border movements, but it's not quite as fully developed as the CTIP project. So they've got different stuff that they're testing across the country, and they're trying to pick spots where they could affect a reasonable op test and solve, kind of different regional issues. Does that make sense?
So is this a spot that they're looking at?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
All right. Thanks.
So a couple other recommendations that we're moving forward is on the infrastructure side, and I will fix this at some point, but my legend on this graphic is reversed. So the commercial movements are actually the white dashed line, and the passenger movements are actually the solid black line. So what we're recommending here is to reconfigure the southbound lane assignments at the Bridge of the Americas, well upstream of where it happens now, to essentially what happens at that crossing is when you get to the approach, all the trucks are trying to get right, all the cars are trying to get left, and there's a lot of merging and weaving that goes on and just kind of clogs that intersection up. So what we're recommending here is to separate the cars and trucks further upstream of that approach, get the trucks slotted where they need to be, get the cars slotted where they need to be, through some jersey barriers or some medians, some signage, some restriping actually, and essentially untangle that intersection a little bit. So by the time they get to the approach, they're in the lanes where they need to be, and there's not this merging and weaving that goes on. So relatively small costs. If you couple it with some targeted enforcement there, we think we can untangle that intersection. Not going to solve all the world's problems at that crossing, but we'll certainly make it a little safer and a little more smooth to get through it, particularly at peak hour. And the final recommendation here, in terms of the scenario testing, was to implement a series of system improvements at Zaragoza, and it's really two key things that we're talking about. One, and it's shown in the black dashed line on the side there, is to add a left turn lane for southbound trucks from Border Highway into the southbound cargo facility. So what that does is it provides a little more storage capacity for trucks, and when they queue up, they can queue up in that left turn lane and get them out of the general travel lane. So that commercially focused kind of recommendation, but again, one that has benefits to passenger cars as well. The other thing that we're recommending, and again, this works way better if you've got staffing, Customs and Border Protection staffing there. You do have room at that crossing to add some inspection capacity for northbound trucks. That's what's shown in the white dashed line. So you can add several booths there. You can add some fast lanes there. If you can couple that with some additional inspection capacity, you can really make the northbound movements for commercial vehicles work a lot better too. And again, a commercially focused kind of recommendation, but one that has benefits both to commercial movements and passenger movements as well. So Zaragoza is looks very promising in terms of the amount of land that's available to invest, and you've got a much larger footprint at that crossing than you do at other crossings. In terms of the implementation actions and the implementation recommendations that we're making, there are several things that we're talking about. Two key pieces. One is how do you fund it, and the second piece is how do you generate momentum to keep this thing moving ahead. On the first topic, there are a number of traditional sources that exist to fund or finance these types of improvements to the degree that they still exist at the federal and state level, and who knows what that's going to look like in the near term. But coordinated border infrastructure funds is something that the city is looking at to invest in this technology solution. State and federal transportation funds, again, to the degree that they exist, could be useful. I think the important opportunity for this region is to investigate, and I know the city is already doing this, investigate public-private partnership opportunities. Part of one of the members of our team, KPMG, did a market valuation analysis of the existing assets that the region has, again, as a very preliminary step into looking at public-private partnership opportunities. And I think are we briefing your board? I think we're briefing your board again at some point in the next several weeks. With
I know
KPMG.
we'd like to see that. I don't know if we have that.
So if it has not been scheduled, I will make sure it does get scheduled so they can walk you through exactly what that looked like and what that means. The city, through their RFI process, is already investigating opportunities in this world. So I think it's certainly a promising opportunity to leverage some assets and generate some capital that either in an initial upfront payment or as on a continuing revenue stream that the region could use to invest in these types of capital investments and others as well. So like I said, if it has not been scheduled, I'll make sure that the KPMG folks get down here and walk you through that process and what they looked at. The next piece is another critical part of making sure this stuff gets implemented is getting a sense of ownership of the plan and the recommendations, and setting some directions for moving forward. There are a number of different committees and groups that kind of are swirling around out there that have some piece of interest or some stake in what happens here. What we're recommending is to create an operations plan implementation task force. Likely, what we're recommending now is likely leveraging the city's existing Committee on Border Relations, which already has folks and members from the general public and heavy users of the system, which is important, the shipper carrier Maquila community, which is important, security folks, Customs and Border Protection, and others. So it seems to us to be a logical place to kind of have this ownership and be the driving force behind implementing some of these recommendations or all of these recommendations. And to the degree that there are other issues that come up or there are other kind of future needs or future steps that the region needs to take to address some of the issues that we've highlighted here above and beyond beyond operational improvements, seems to us to be a logical vehicle, this type of task force, to kind of drive that process as well. So those are the two key implementation action items. Think about how to fund this stuff. Think about how you could organize yourselves in a region institutionally to get some sense of ownership on what the recommendations say. So just in terms of what we're up to for the next several weeks, we're in the midst of our public meeting process now. We have 7 scheduled throughout the region between this week and next week. We've done 3 already. We've got 1 tonight on the east side, or in northeast, excuse me. 1 more tomorrow, and then 2 next week at Riverside High School and at Bowie High School. So 7 total, and we'll be done with that process at the end of next week. We have a draft report that has been provided to our advisory committee, which Mr. McLaughlin is a member of. We are also providing that draft. We are posting that draft report up on our website in the next several days, so to allow folks to take a look at it and give us some comments above and beyond the comments that we're getting at our public meetings. After the 19th. We'll spend a couple weeks finalizing that comment period, making whatever changes, and incorporating the feedback we get from that process within our materials, turning a final report back to our advisory committee and to the region at the end of May. And we're on the agenda for a number of different groups at the end of May, beginning of June, including El Paso City Council. We'll be presenting at their May 31st meeting. The MPO Policy Board, I think we're presenting at their June meeting. And to the degree that you'd like us to come back and present the final recommendations to your board, we're happy to do that as well.
I think we'd be real interested in seeing the market valuation.
Okay.
Specifically, I thought one of the recommendations was going to be to add 3 more physical lanes at Zaragoza, and the market valuation study possibly would be utilized as a way to look at how we could finance that. Is that still one of the recommendations, to add 3 more physical commercial lanes at Zaragoza?
It is, and that's part of that lanes. So it's 3 more lanes, booths, and inspection capacity at Zaragoza. And certainly to the degree that the region would want to investigate public-private partnership opportunities to pay for that, that's certainly appropriate to do that.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting is in some of the background that Cambridge provided is a number of our bridges are already at kind of operational capacity on cargo, on commercial today. How much more time does this do, if all of these were implemented, what does that do to operational capacity at the bridges? Because it appears that a number of them are on the commercial side approaching or at that peak, and a number on the pedestrian, and I know that hadn't been a big part of that, but also the passengers. So how do these what do these steps in this investment do for us in terms of giving us additional time with the bridges?
At best, and it varies by crossing, certainly. At best, you're looking at less than 10 years of added time, typically anywhere between 3 and 8 years, depending on the crossing. So what the operational improvements can do a lot, but they really can't get ahead of the demand projection that we're seeing. I mean, you've got a relatively speaking, pretty strong population growth, pretty strong industry growth, and all and socioeconomically it's growing as well, demographically. So all of those are the key drivers into travel demand, and the operational improvements that we're recommending just can't get ahead of the growth in those areas, which really feed into the demand picture.
So is it fair to take this study and take a look at it and say, doing all the various things that we can do to the bridges, as a region, we are not going to be competitive with the current infrastructure that exists today, and as a region, we're going to need to be able to come together and look at and discuss possibly putting additional infrastructure in to support passenger, commercial, and pedestrian traffic back and forth from Mexico?
That's an entirely appropriate discussion to have, and certainly one that is occurring based on our analysis across the region. It happened at City Council yesterday, happened at the MPO level last week. So certainly, I would say a completely logical reaction to the kind of information we're providing.
And how much time would we need to put additional infrastructure in? How much time do we really have based on what you've seen here?
Well, so this came up yesterday.
Process.
It's a long process. I mean, when you look at what San Diego did, which is somewhat equivalent to what you're looking at here, and what the process looked like for their presidential permit application at Otay Mesa, that was a 10-year process. So just to get the president's permit in place.
But what I hear from the State Department, though, is that it doesn't have to take that long. When the community has its act together and they submit the paperwork and they have somebody on it, it doesn't take 10 years. It can take 2 or 3.
I agree.
It's just that the El Paso community in particular has been quite, neglectful of its duties. And I remember when we initiated the discussions on a potential new bridge, because here we have to talk about the gains from more efficient use of the existing infrastructure and adding new infrastructure. And in the beginning, I pushed for new infrastructure as well, and the city budged the more plausible effort to add a new bridge, and in a public hearing that became a major scandal. And so when the community does that, and so I take your recommendation for a serious task force to stay on this is the most serious recommendation, because all the other things, we know them. I mean, we've known this for a long time. Those of us who have taken a look at the bridges and are heavy users of the international bridges realize many of these things. The CBP part is a very complicated things. So all these things are not new. But I'm not sure that the City Committee on Cross-Border Relations is the right body to do it, particularly because it continues to be, in my view, a one-legged body. It has no people from the other side. We're forgetting that the other half of the bridge is owned by Mexico. And so, and the governmental structure is different, the ownership is different, the layers are not coincidental, so it's a very, very complex thing. And I think that no one in El Paso, and not even the city and its bridge directorship, are on top of this. And so I think we need that task force, particularly well integrated and binational, to make sure that everything moves smoothly. And it doesn't have to take 10 years. When I hosted the State Department bridge conference here at UTEP 3 or 4 years ago, they said, look, the bridges in South Texas were approved within 2 to 3 years. But they had their act together. We don't.
Well, fortunately for Mr. Brogan, the presidential permit was beyond the scope of the studies.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank goodness.
Is there any other questions for Cambridge?
I have a quick question for you. How does, and I don't know if you all have done this or not, how does this compare with the port of entries in other parts of Texas?
In terms of?
In terms of what's going on with them, what are their position? Where are they in relation to congestion and potentially reaching capacity?
They not having studied in detail those crossings, my sense is they're in a little bit better shape than you guys, and it's a variety for a variety of reasons. I mean, there are many things that make El Paso unique. One thing is you've got very tightly connected, very urban areas, extremely urban areas, probably the most urbanized twin regions along the southern border, I would say. So that feeds the congestion. There's a lot more kind of commute traffic that happens here. There's a lot more when you're connecting two very major urbanized areas together. They're the size of current day Houston. That tends to have some challenges, and it's different from what happens at Laredo and some of the other major crossings. The other thing that my sense of why you've got a little bit of a bigger issue here than other parts of the southern border is the nature of the operations, and part of that is the urbanized issue. But the nature of the operations here are different as well, on the commercial side and on the passenger side. On the commercial side, Laredo, for instance, is much more of a long-haul commercial market than El Paso is, where you've got twin plants and you've got maquilas and it's much more of a kind of a drayage operation back and forth, a lot of turns. Whereas Laredo, it's much more, not that doesn't happen in Laredo, but it's much more of a long-haul market in my sense than on the commercial side than El Paso is. And again, on the commute side, it's the same thing. You've got a lot of back and forth here on the passenger side as well that doesn't necessarily happen to the same degree at other parts of the southern border. So when you put all that together, that really makes wait times and delay times a lot worse here than in other places. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, and potentially then we aren't as competitive as we should be with South Texas.
That certainly. So you could certainly make that argument. You could certainly make that argument.
About 3 years ago, we toured the South Texas part, and we visited a lot of the bridges. The Ansaldúa Bridge was still not open. I think it is open now. We visited the World Trade Bridge in Laredo and things like that. They developed a long-term vision, 20 years ago, and they have coordinated their actions, every county and every city in the state, and developed it. We haven't gotten that far, and I think the RMA can provide that leadership. I just think that we need to begin to do it.
Well, hopefully this study is the beginning of that
Right.
really kind of complete conversation about what's needed here. So.
Thank you.
I had a comment for Jim. Jim, if you go back to the previous slide on the potential funding sources, CBI might be in jeopardy. I don't know how stable a potential funding source that might be. And David, I'm sure you have some ideas about how stable the state transportation funding sources may or may not be in the future. So really, the only one that could be or is a source is the public-private partnership. So what I'd like to see are identifying the private sources, the private companies and groups that are stakeholders and would have, could potentially be great partners in going forward and have a stake in these projects in your final report, or at least a recommendation in your final report.
And actually, we do have that in the body of the report, and actually, and the KPMG market valuation piece, which I'm hopeful will be up on our website soon as well, has a huge table in there that lists all the different folks that have done this in the past on the private sector side. Here's what their interests are. Here's what they've done. So we can certainly provide that information too.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that because we are really a financing organization more than anything else, we have to have a discussion about whether we want to be also a management organization and whether the city is willing to sell its stakes and its bridges. And it's.
I think we're more than a financing organization. I mean, we have the ability to do a whole lot in conjunction with our GEC to really kind of manage the whole process.
Well, that's what I mean. We could move in that direction. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's just a function of what we decide as a community that we need and how the RMA can go in to create a solution to fill that need. So,
Right.
And how we can be either the total solution or part of that solution or whatever all the regional partners think is best.
Right.
So, any more questions for Jim? Jim, thank you very much.
Can I ask you one more question? Sorry. No, I meant to ask one question, one more. Did you meet with anybody on the other side of the bridge? Did you talk to any of the organizations, government agencies? Did you get that take over there about what they see and view in these focus groups, interviews, and surveys?
Absolutely, yes to all of that. So the survey in particular was on both sides, and we ensured that happened. As part of our stakeholder outreach and our targeted interviews, and we're still working on getting some of these scheduled for this round, but we have talked to these folks in previous rounds. The Mexican Consulate, SCT, State of Chihuahua, EMIP, Aduana, and so we feel like we've got a pretty good sense of what their issues are in this way as well.
Thanks.
If I may make a suggestion that you form a committee, that we've got some talented people that have a lot of information on this already, then maybe possibly explore what we can do with this.
I think it's great. Let's finish up with the market valuation study, and then we can, as a group, decide how we can, through the planning committee, take a look at this, or set aside a different committee just to study this particular project. So going forward, because it's obvious that a new bridge is needed. The question is where would it be located, and how would it be funded, and how long would it take to get done? So those are the big questions. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Item 5, discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the executive director to execute a disputes boards agreement with the America's Gateway Builders for the Loop 375 at I-10 America's Interchange Project. Mr. Tejas?
Raymond Tejas, Executive Director for the record. And in fact, actually, if we could take item 5B with it as well, which involves the dispute board member joinder agreement with the America's Gateway Builders and each of the following proposed dispute board members, which are Donald Henderson, Warren Bullock, and Robert Smith. Item 5 in general, by way of background, deals with the creation of a disputes board. Through the Design Build Comprehensive Development Agreement, which the RMA entered into with the Americas Gateway Builders for the Americas Interchange project, there's a provision in there that deals with disputes and how to resolve them prior to moving forward into lawsuit setting. And the main provision is for the creation of what's referred to as the disputes board. And in essence, what happens is the RMA appoints one disputes board member. The developer, in this case, Americas Gateway Builders, appoints one disputes board member, and those two members then select the chair. That has occurred to date. In fact, in your packet under 5B, you have two sets of documents. The second document under 5B are the resumes for each of the three appointees. The RMA's appointee is Donald Henderson. The AGB appointee is Warren Bullock. And collectively, they then selected Robert Smith. And you'll notice that each of these resumes are extensive. They're all very experienced individuals. By way of example, Mr. Henderson, who is the RMA's proposed appointee, has over 38 years of experience and has been involved in, I believe, at least 70 dispute boards throughout the country. So we've got a great deal of experience. Both Mr. Bullock and Mr. Henderson are registered professional engineers. Mr. Smith is a registered professional engineer as well as an attorney. So I think we've got a great deal of experience on the proposed board. So then really what you see before you under item 5A is the disputes board agreement, which is required by the Comprehensive Development Agreement to formalize the creation of the disputes board. Item 5B then are the three individual agreements between the Americas Gateway Builders, the RMA, and each of the individual disputes board proposed appointees. So that's really what you see before you. So then to back it up, with the original packet of materials that was provided to you last week, you received a copy of the original disputes board agreement. However, at that time, I mentioned in the email that there would be a couple of minor revisions that we were reviewing with AGB and each of the proposed board members. So if I could ask you under 5A to turn to page 3, I wanted to go through 3 of the proposed revisions, and they're provided to you in red line form, so we can jump to them quickly. The agreements have stayed in the same form except for the areas that have been redlined under 5.3. This is the first of the main revisions, and that was to remove the provision that allowed for discovery within the dispute board resolution processes. And to step back again, these dispute board resolution processes are really intended to be informal, very cooperative partnering sessions, really, between AGB and the RMA that are really kind of mediated by the three-panel board. So it didn't make a lot of sense under 5.3 to include discovery requirements and that sort of thing because we're not including lawyers in this process. So we removed that. We went back to the original intent, which is one of more cooperation and fewer rules. So if you turn the page then to page 4, the second main change is there under 5.5.2, which removes, or actually I should say clarifies, the intent that lawyers would not be involved in this process. Now we can certainly include our lawyers as silent observers, but we didn't want the lawyers to run these processes because then it becomes a separate process. And really that's the point of this process, is to be a much more informal pursuit of resolution so that we don't have to go into the legal setting. So that's
a much more speedier pursuit.
That's the intent, absolutely. So that clarification is.
But if it goes to a lawsuit setting, anything there can be used in court, right?
It cannot. In fact, that's expressly noted throughout these entire agreements. And that's really the point, is that everybody's supposed to be very forthcoming, and part of why you don't want the lawyers, there are no notes taken other than notes from the panel, and those notes are destroyed after the fact. None of this is admissible later, and in fact, you'll see in one of the later revisions, these panel members cannot be brought into the legal setting either. So it's intended to be a very informal pursuit of resolution. So then the third main revision can be found in section 563, and this deals with the request for clarification. So at the end of the process, the panel will develop a recommendation and provide that formal written recommendation to both parties. If there are any sections that either the RMA or AGB is not clear on, either of us can then request clarification in writing. And what we originally had in there was that we could call the panel back together and have an additional meeting, although that adds more cost, adds more time. So the intent really was to make this a much more streamlined approach. And remember, too, we're trying to expedite the resolution. So if we realize we're not going to resolve this dispute through this board, we need to get into the legal setting as quickly as possible. So we streamlined it and made it kind of a quicker turnaround. And really, other than that, there's just some clarifications. For example, we clarified that there is no appeal for the disputes board recommendation. Again, we would go straight to the legal setting. Some clarifications. Some items were covered elsewhere, so they were deleted. And that's really about it. So the agreement that you received last week was revised in those three main areas.
I guess a couple of items to note is, one, we're required to do this with our agreement. Two, the cost of this has already been built into all the funding of the particular project, so this is not additional cost to the project itself. This is just something that, as the project is well underway, we're required to have in place in case there is a disagreement or dispute. So
that's correct. And in fact, the way that these costs are broken out is that the developer actually pays for everything up front, so that the board members will bill AGB, and then at the end of each month, AGB will then bill us for half of those charges. So we split those charges in half.
And it's common, I guess, to have a dispute or disagreement as you're moving on projects of this size. So while it's running fairly smoothly, we need to have the process and the personnel in place to address anything that may arise. So.
And that's a good point. And part of what happens with this board is that they meet generally quarterly, and they will take a tour. They're here maybe an afternoon, maybe a full day at the most. They're here in El Paso taking a tour of the site, asking questions, and getting briefed by both sides. And so that the intent is they know the project, they know the issues, and if a dispute arises, they're up to speed already, and they can move through the dispute process very quickly.
And they're free to ask any questions they have and accumulate their information just in case, so they can have
absolutely
full
correct.
Disclosure to them as they tour the facilities or the construction site.
That's absolutely correct. And part of that, too, is that the RMA cannot have individual conversations with any of the three. It has to be held with all three, and then beyond that with AGB's presence as well. So this is really intended to be a very cooperative process. And even though we are recommending the selection of Mr. Henderson, he does not speak for us. He does not work for us. He works for both parties.
Okay.
I had a question. I mean, obviously, these three gentlemen have very extensive experience and specialized expertise, but is there a reason why we didn't seek anybody local or even regional?
Well, the bottom line answer to that is that there is not this expertise locally in particular. In fact, the individual that we've selected, Mr. Henderson, has the expertise, has done all of the dispute boards in the state of Texas for the RMAs. So he is the most experienced from the RMA side. He understands how RMAs work. He understands the processes that we are restricted by or that we work within. So he is the most experienced. And unfortunately, he's not from Texas or El Paso.
Okay, I thought he was our former mayor when I saw the name.
Right, so did I initially.
And let me ask you, in regard to the Texas RMAs, there's already been disputes where he has been actively involved in resolving?
That's correct.
Okay.
Raymond, just for, what's the fee schedule for Mr. Smith? I don't see it here.
That is under 5B in the first grouping. You'll see at the back there are 3 annexes. I don't know what the plural for that
Annex
word is.
1.
Actually. So the third annex, number 1, shows you that his fee is $250 per hour. Mr. Henderson and Mr. Bullock, their fee is $225 per hour.
Now, one of them, I think Mr. Henderson says portal to portal. What does that mean?
They are all port to port. So that essentially means when they leave their home airport,
clock
they
starts?
begin charging until they get back.
Okay. And then Mr. Bullock says he'll fly business class if the air exceeds 3 hours, single leg. What does that mean? I'm just trying to figure out what to educate myself on all this. If you look at Mr. Bullock, the last
No stops,
sentence.
maybe? I don't know.
That means if his flight from his home base to El Paso is in excess of 3 hours.
So he's going to travel business. Well, from California to here, it's going to be more than 3 hours. If it includes the layovers.
It's single leg.
Single leg?
Right.
That's what I mean by single leg?
That's right. It's got to be
One way.
at least one of the flights is over 3 hours. He's going to travel.
Okay,
So if you had to go to Brazil or something,
But layover's not included, in other words, so
correct. It's direct flight segments from how I read that.
Yes, sir.
that's what single leg means. Okay. Again, I'm just trying to, this is new to me,
We'll
so.
encourage him to fly the company plane
Yeah,
Southwest.
right.
We always do. Yes, sir.
Okay. That's fine.
I like this agreement. I'd like to move to approve both 5A and 5B.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any approved, or any that don't approve? The motion carries. 5A and 5B are approved. Item 6, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to issue a request for proposals seeking marketing services relative to the CRRMA's annual report and strategic plan requirements.
Okay, this item, as you will recall, the board has requested that we go out for a new procurement for marketing and outreach services. This relates to, originally it related specifically to the development of our annual reports and strategic plans. As you recall, we have used one local marketing firm for the prior 3 years for each of those documents. So after the third year, the board asked that we issue a procurement for those services, not only for marketing and outreach, but also for CPA services, which you see as item number 7. So what you see before you is number 6 is the actual request for proposals for marketing and outreach. And in fact, what I've done is expanded it a little bit outside of just the annual reports and strategic plans to allow us to use the selected firm for website development, should we need it, for social media, for development of pamphlets and other outreach activities that we would require over the coming 3 years. The intent really is for me to bring forward a recommendation to the board at the July meeting for execution of an agreement for a 3-year term with 2 one-year options. That's the intent. So what you see before you is the draft request for proposals, and I'm asking for authority to issue this and begin the process, really.
Can you tell me why, are we unhappy with the previous?
No, not
Or
at
is
all.
it just their term expired, or what is it?
It's really, there is no, as far as I understand, we are very happy with the current provider. However, generally what you have in the procurement setting is turnover. So the idea is to continue to seek different providers so that you basically spread the wealth.
And they'll compete too.
Yes, absolutely, and absolutely. The current provider should be part of the process.
It also ensures that you're getting the best
Right.
bang for your buck.
We're not taken for granted.
Exactly. Well, more than that. I mean, when you submit it to a competitive bid process, prices tend to go down.
And I think that actually may have come from a suggestion from the board, perhaps Mr. Marcus, that we look at putting this out. How are we going to review the RFIs? We had a little discussion about that, Mr. Tejas. When
Yes.
did we finally settle on how those are going to be reviewed and selected?
So what we'll do is we'll use our consultants, our GEC team, to review the submittals, and we'll put together a team of 3 individuals and have them review these and develop a recommendation that will come back to the board for selection. There is a scoring, and really what I want you to look at in particular is the selection process. You can see that on page 7. The criteria for selection and weighting, really qualifications and experience is weighted at 70%, with a compensation and fee structure at 30%. Now, obviously, these percentages are subject to your review. Where I should go back. The way that this RFP was developed was through prior RFPs of the Camino Real RMA, and beyond that, a fairly recent RFP for community involvement services that the Alamo RMA released, I believe, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. 2 years ago, actually, it was. So I really kind of melded those two together, and that's how this RFP was put together.
So if I understand you correctly, you're going to come back with one recommendation, or?
Well, I will come back with a full breakdown of the entire process, how many submittals were received, how they were ranked, and then whoever was ranked number one, what the scoring was, and the recommendation that we proceed with that entity.
I guess the information that Mr. Tejas needs most of all is, as a board, are we happy with the scoring of experience at 70% and compensation at 30%? To me, that seems very reasonable, and we want somebody with more experience than, purely based on price.
Let me see. Let me think about that for a second. 70-30, why not 50-50? I mean, somebody who may be less experienced in doing this may be just as good, or may even have the latest in terms, because they're probably younger, potentially, in a theoretical scenario, people who have just been trained in the newest, whereas the established older business may still be using, an older design or things like that. So I'm not sure that experience should be given the bigger weight. It's almost irrelevant, but why not cost? Why not assign cost the bigger weight, or 50%? Seems to me more.
And I guess I wasn't thinking experience was necessarily years. I mean, there's some fantastic media firms that are brand new and
Exactly.
have fantastic experience. So I don't know. I guess it's how we define experience.
Exactly.
I think experience could be just, you're right, it could be just a function of who they have actually produced campaigns for in the recent past.
This also includes our accounting services as well, though, correct?
No, sir, that's a separate that's an RFQ, actually.
Well, if that's the intent of this board, that it needs to be conveyed to whoever's going to be doing the scoring, right, or GE?
Oh, absolutely.
That to us, experience is not defined in terms of years.
Well, and experience is defined, and this is an area that I could revise should you all think that it's not covered. On page 5, you'll see under B, firm experience and qualifications. So what we're looking for is the last 5 years, the firm's experience in providing marketing, public relations, education, and outreach services to agencies or organizations similar in size and scope. 3 references we ask for, and
So would it disqualify a particular business? Because it says for the prior 5 years, please outline your experience in doing this and this. And so if somebody says, well, we're a 3-year-old business, here's our 3-year dossier, that's fine.
Sure.
They'll look at 3-year dossier because it's a 3-year-old firm, and it may just be acceptable and not disqualified because they're only 3 years old.
That's right.
Okay.
And beyond that, I should actually mention, when you go back to the criteria and the weighting, what defines qualifications and experiences are not only the firm experience qualifications under B, but also the personnel, so the specific personnel that they would dedicate to this particular account. So that's included in there. The Texas presence and DBE utilization, and also any conflicts of interest go into the qualifications and experience evaluation.
Okay.
Are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Any other questions?
Move to approve item 6.
Second that.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Item 6 is approved. Item 7, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to issue a request for qualifications seeking certified professional accounting services relative to the CRRMA's routine accounting processes as well as its annual audit requirements.
Now,
Tejas?
unfortunately, this one is not quite ready. I was hoping to have it final by the time of this board meeting. However, CPA services are considered professional services under the Professional Services Procurement Act, which require a 2-step process similar to the selection of engineers and architects. So it's a little more detailed of a process. In fact, it's a request for qualifications first step as opposed to a request for proposals. So that one isn't quite ready. I'll have that ready for you at the next board meeting. So I'd ask that this item be deleted.
Before you delete that item, if I may make a suggestion that you remove routine accounting process from the request for qualification. It impinges on a CPA firm's independence if they tell you how to keep your books.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. In fact, that was something that I had been wondering about, because I think from time to time I would need some assistance. So I suppose then that we would have to keep that as a separate agreement.
Actually, it would have to be a separate firm.
Right.
Okay, so
And a separate RFP altogether.
sure, of course.
They can audit their own work.
Should we then, since we're going to delete this item, should we, I guess, have two items, one for kind of routine advice, an RFP for routine advice, and one for an audit going forward?
Well, honestly, I think that the routine advice is so minimal, and I don't require it on such a significant basis that I would suggest we don't go through a procurement process, and that I'd be granted authority to pursue that. In fact, I believe I have that authority. In fact, for most of these, I have that authority because the board has provided a threshold by which I can pursue those. But if you'd allow me to do the procurement process for the annual audits and then allow some discretion for the day-to-day routine operations.
Sure, I'm sure we could probably get some of that advice for the day-to-day right through our GEC, which if we needed it, they could help us provide, correct?
We could. I mean, honestly, though, because the city acts as our fiscal agent, we normally go to them and they provide someone.
Even better because, you know,
Most of that
sorry,
would-
Pete, no cost. So just,
most of that's provided.
you know,
Raymond, I think for the sake of transparency and clarity, when you come back with a recommendation for the auditor, that you either for the record or some point out that you will be getting accounting advice or counsel from someone other than the auditor.
Okay, I can do that, absolutely.
I was going to even suggest it just be informal. It could be. I mean, routine accounting advice doesn't require whoever you're getting it from to be independent from. I could give you routine accounting advice.
Okay.
I couldn't do the audit, obviously. So you may not even need you could just go get it.
Okay.
And that's fine. I just want to make sure for the record that we stipulate that they were separating the two. Okay?
Understood. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
is there a motion to delete item 7?
So move.
All those in favor? Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Item 7. Item 8, update, discussion, and action on the executive director's report related to, looks like 6 different projects, starting out with Loop 375 Northeast Mainline Extension Project, Loop 375 FM 659 Zaragoza Direct Connector Project, I-10 Corridor Aesthetic Improvement Project, Loop 375 Cesar Chavez Border Highway Managed Lane Project, I-10 at Mesa Park Frontage Roads and Interchange Project, and the CRRMA website updates. Mr. Tejas has been really busy the last, well, he's always very busy, but especially busy the last 90 days or so with all this. So, Mr. Tejas, you have the floor.
Well, very briefly, if we could deal with item 8F, if you have a chance, and really this is more of a reminder than anything else, to have a look at our website and see if it's covering all of the areas that you would like it to. We've made a couple of revisions lately, and in fact, after last board meeting, there were some requests from the board to add certain information to the website. We've done that, and we've done that in the form of a news box on the homepage. So have a look at that when you have a chance. Beyond that, we've been updating it periodically and we added an RSS feed and that sort of thing. So let me know if it's covering what you think it ought to, and obviously let me know what you'd like to see added to it.
Let me ask you a question real quick. Would the marketing services that we have a request for proposal for on item 6 cover kind of enhancing or looking at the website and seeing how we can make it more interactive?
Yes, sir. It's written broadly enough to cover that as well.
Got it.
Now,
Is the city still doing it for you?
yes, and that's what I was going to mention. The city of El Paso provides those services through their in-kind agreement with us. However, an outside independent review and recommendations and suggestions could come from that marketing RFP.
Great.
So that leads us to items 8A through E. Really, what the intention of this memorandum that you all received, and I apologize you received it late yesterday, but I felt that it was important to walk you through this, and I felt that it was also important to provide you with a hard copy so that you all could take this with you and review it at your leisure. And then obviously feel free to give me a call with any questions as they arise. Now, this is really intended to be a snapshot in time. As you know, each of these projects are very unique, and a lot of what the region is doing here in El Paso is unique not only to TxDOT, but in particular unique for this region. We're doing a lot of things for the first time throughout the state through a lot of these projects, through the Comprehensive Mobility Plan in particular. So what you see before you is really an update of the prior memorandum that I provided to you, I believe, about 4, 5, 6 months ago. It's an update of that, again, just a snapshot in time. This will change again. But I figured that because there have been so many recent activities, I thought it was timely to provide you with an update. So if you turn to page 2, we can discuss briefly the Trans Mountain Northeast project. And really what's happened that is of most importance with each of these projects, really the comprehensive mobility projects, is that TxDOT has awarded these contracts. And you'll note that this project was awarded to J.D. Abrams in the amount of $49.6 million. The winning bid was actually 16.82% lower than TxDOT's estimated construction cost, which is a good thing. And in the end, what that allows for in terms of this project, actually, let me take it back one step. As you recall, the RMA for this project was tasked with providing the financing for it. And the way that we were going to provide that was through a $20 million SIB loan and a $5.7 million bond issuance that would be repaid through the pass-through program of TxDOT. However, because of the lower than expected bid award, and also because of the fact that TxDOT has provided many of its own resources to the development of the project and has not charged the project budget, because of that, there are significant savings to the project, which in the end, we believe means that the RMA will not have to take out any debt for this project, and the Category 2 funds from TxDOT can be used for the completion of this project. Now, having said that, the RMA did complete the application process for the State Infrastructure Bank loan and also the pass-through program through TxDOT as well. The intent behind the completion of those processes was that in the event that unforeseen circumstances require additional funds above and beyond what TxDOT Category 2 funds are available, then the RMA would be able to pull those pre-approved debt issuances from the shelf and be able to enter into those very quickly.
And that would be repaid, if required, hopefully not, through the TRZ fund, TRZ number 2.
For the SIB loan, it's actually TRZ number 3 for the Trans Mountain Northeast project. That's correct.
Hopefully it's not required, but it's there just in case, and I think it was prudent on our part to put that in place, so if the project is moving along and there was some sort of change that was required, we could fund that.
That's a good idea.
And I would mention, too, that because the majority of the project, if not all of the project, is covered by existing Category 2 funds, we reduced our State Infrastructure Bank loan requested amount from $20 million down to $6 million. So that freed up funds within the State Infrastructure Bank loan so that they could make those loans elsewhere. So we did that, and in doing that, actually, I should mention as well, we received a lower interest rate of 4.05% from the original 4.95%. And we, in working with the city agreed that if, in fact, we would have to take out any of these loans, that they would be comfortable with a 20-year maximum term as well. Beyond that, the remaining term of that proposed SIB loan would be interest-only payments for the first 2 years. So that's, again, the intent is that we wouldn't have to take out any debt, but if we do, those are the terms by which we would take out the debt. Currently, then, the RMA is waiting for draft agreements from TxDOT, and those draft agreements are for the State Infrastructure Bank loan as well as the pass-through toll agreement.
And this project already has been awarded to, I believe, J.D. Abrams, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir. So that's the update for Trans Mountain Northeast. If you turn the page to page 6, then we have the Zaragoza Direct Connectors project. Originally, as you recall, this original budget was $32 million. This project was awarded by TxDOT to A.S. Horner, who is actually the developer that is currently working on the Schuster project for TxDOT at UTEP. This project was awarded for $25.49 million, and this winning bid was 2% lower than the TxDOT estimate of $26 million. TxDOT resources were also used for the design, construction, engineering. All of those additional resources were provided by TxDOT, so additional savings were realized on this project as well. However, it's not to the extent that it was in the Trans Mountain Northeast. As a reminder, for this project, the RMA was going to issue debt in the amount of $20 million for the SIB loan and also $7 million in bonds that would be repaid through the pass-through program of TxDOT. Savings were realized, but not to the extent of Trans Mountain Northeast, so the RMA will have to issue debt. we will issue the $7 million in bonds, and however, we will only have to issue $16.6 million, or rather, we will only have to take out a state infrastructure bank loan of $16.6 million.
Mr. Tice, is there a more, and this is one of the things that I'd ask you maybe to talk to our financial advisors, is there a more effective way? $7 million in bonds seems to be a rather small amount of bonds. I don't know how cost effective it would be. Is there a more effective financing method for that $7 million other than issuing bonds to be repaid through the pass-through toll agreement?
Yeah, and that's a good question. We're looking at two different proposals. Either one, we combine this $7 million, and I guess I should be more clear. When I refer to the bonds, that's almost a placeholder, because our financial advisors will review that before we actually go into the next step. What they're really looking at are two opportunities for us. Either combine these bonds with the Americas bonds that have to be issued as well in the amount of $5 million, whether or not we have bonds for the Trans Mountain Northeast and any other potential bonds for, by way of example, of the Executive Center project that we're looking at here soon as well. So they would do a combined issuance to make it worth our while. The other alternative is, if that does not occur, if by way of example one project doesn't need the funds for another 2 years, then it doesn't make sense to combine them. So then our FA would likely recommend that we go through some sort of other debt issuance. So really, I shouldn't continue to use the pass-through bonds. It's really pass-through debt, and that debt could take any form.
Fair enough. I think, the real winner in both of these projects, really in all the projects, is the community. I mean, we were looking at, as a community, having $20 million on both of these projects that were going to be repaid through the TRZ. All of a sudden now we're only looking at maybe $6 million on Northeast that at this point is not required but potentially could be, and only $16 million. So instead of $40 million of TRZ debt that had to be repaid through the TRZs, now we're really only looking at $16 million plus potentially another $6. So it went from 40 to a maximum right now anticipated of 22, but maybe only 16. So the fact that these projects were let in an environment where it's very competitive, had a large number of bids, we're getting these projects built, they're getting on board, and they're providing solutions to the community today at a very effective price. So the way the whole deal worked out, really, the community and citizens are the benefactors.
Agreed. And just one last note. So the SIB loan terms for this project is, again, we're looking for up to $20 million, and the approval from the Transportation Commission is for the full $20 million. We would only actually take down what we needed, which at this point looks like $16 million. But we are authorized for up to the full 20. We would have a 30-year maximum term at 4.95 interest rate, and interest-only payments for the first 2 years. And all of those terms match what we were provided in the Americas State Infrastructure Bank loan. And all of these terms were reviewed and approved by the city, as, of course, the repayment source is the Transportation Reinvestment Zone number 2 for this project. Lastly, I would note that the RMA is waiting for drafts from TxDOT for the State Infrastructure Bank loan agreement as well as the pass-through toll agreement. Both of these, not only for Zaragoza, but also Trans Mountain Northeast, all of those agreements will come back to this board for review and final approval. So that takes us to page 4, which deals with the aesthetic improvement project. As a reminder, this is the $10 million project. Originally, the way that this project was going to be financed was through Category 2 funds from TxDOT that would be released by TxDOT in September of 2011. That $5 million, I should mention, the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, when it was developed, all of the funding sources were mapped out at that time. And that's when the initial $5 million for this project became available in September 2011. However, the project partners on this one, in particular the City of El Paso, the RMA, and TxDOT, didn't want to wait until September of 2011 to begin the aesthetic project. So what the city agreed to was providing upfront cash in the amount of up to $500,000 so that we could begin the design work, and that has begun. So once the $5 million becomes available in September 2011, then the RMA will repay the city for any expenses incurred to date, and then beyond that would take over all of the financing through the Category 2 funds. So again, originally $5 million would become available to the RMA from TxDOT in September 2011, and the remaining $5 million would then be some form of debt issued by the RMA, which would be repaid through the pass-through method of TxDOT. And those repayments from the pass-through program would be $2 million in June of 12, $2 million in June of 2013, and the remaining $1 million in June of 2014. However, as I mentioned, this is another comprehensive mobility plan project. There are a number of those projects have been moved around due to environmental delays or just various other reasons. So what has happened is that TxDOT has proposed a different financing structure for this project, and specifically what they've requested is that the RMA have access to $2.87 million in September 2011 instead of the full $5 million. However, the remaining $7.13 million would then become available to the RMA in September 2012. So the end result for the RMA is that we would have the full $10 million by September 2012, and more importantly, we wouldn't have to take out any debt whatsoever. So that removes any and all financing costs related to that second $5 million. So that means more project funds for actual project development, which I think is a really good thing. I've checked with the City of El Paso and the artist, who is actually the artist and engineers who are doing the design work, and they believe that this flow of funds should be sufficient. So essentially what has now happened is that in September 2011, the RMA will have access to $2.87 million. We will, our first payment will be to the City of El Paso to repay them for any expenses they've incurred to date. 1 year later, in September of 2012, we would then have access to the remaining $7.13 million, and we'll pursue the entire project without debt.
More good news.
Yes, absolutely.
And Ms. Holguin represents the RMA on the board, along with the city and a couple of other entities that are working with the artist and looking at the aesthetic projects. So hopefully in the next couple of months we'll be able to have a presentation and kind of see where that is going and what we're looking at and what that $10 million can do to really improve aesthetics along I-10.
It's a little comforting to me because, as you know, Mr. Chairman, I voted against this project, because I just think aesthetics at this point in time with this financial crisis. But, I mean, it's good to know that we're moving in the right direction of less debt and perhaps even at a lesser cost. So it's a good thing.
Payan noted. So I was aware of that from last time, and I continue to be aware of your feeling in that regard. But I can tell you, in looking at some of the things that the artist has done, for $10 million is a significant amount of money, but in the scheme of things, it's really not overall when we're looking at 150 million projects here and there. However, I think that we're going to see a real bang for the buck with some of the things potentially that could be done. So, Mr. Taz?
So procedurally then, to back up, the original financing plan required the execution of a pass-through toll agreement with TxDOT, which we did. And if you recall, the pass-through toll agreement that we have with TxDOT covers the Americas Interchange project as well as the aesthetic project. So procedurally, what we'll have to do is amend that existing pass-through toll agreement to remove the aesthetic component and then enter into a project development agreement solely for the aesthetic project. So both of those instruments, the amendment to the pass-through toll agreement and the new project development agreement, are both in TxDOT's court as well. So we are awaiting those drafts. That takes us to page 5, which deals with the Cesar Chavez Managed Lanes project. This one also has good news in that the construction project was awarded to J.D. Abrams for a lesser amount than the original TxDOT estimate. It was awarded for $54.2 million. The original construction estimate from TxDOT was $63.5 million, so there was considerable savings there. This one's a little bit different, though, because the RMA was not providing any financing. These funds are available through $74 million in Prop 14 bond funds and $6.25 million in a federal earmark. And this one is really more of an update to this board. As a reminder, the instruments that have been executed to date include a 129 agreement with FHWA, the RMA, and TxDOT. Essentially what that agreement did was identify the use of any revenues generated from a toll project, specifically the Cesar Chavez project, would be used in the region. That's what the 129 agreement does. Financial assistance agreement, as you recall, as well as the original market valuation agreement, both of which were approved and signed by this RMA board, were then superseded through the amended and restated financial assistance agreement last month, as well as the amended and restated market valuation agreement, also done last month. The final item was done last month as well, which was the RMA board resolution for conditional exercise of primacy. So each of those were major steps towards developing this project, and all of those are done. What remains then is actually a question in TxDOT's court right now. Originally, the understanding was that the the RMA and TxDOT would enter into one project development agreement now that would identify the roles and responsibilities of each party during the construction of the project. Then we understood that we would enter into a second project development agreement once the project is complete, which would govern the roles and responsibilities of the parties during the operation of the facility. And at that point, that's when the RMA would essentially exercise full primacy and say, yes, the RMA is operating this project. However, the Office of General Counsel of TxDOT right now is reviewing this to determine whether or not it should be one project development agreement to cover both scenarios. So at this point, the RMA is awaiting that determination, and then once they make that determination, we will receive the draft project development agreement or two project development agreements, either of which will come before this board for final review and approval. So that is the latest on that project. Lastly, I just wanted to mention this because we haven't talked about this project in some time. As you recall, I-10 at Mesa Park frontage roads and interchange project. This is the project that we were approached by a local developer to pursue, which essentially brought frontage roads from Executive up to the proposed Mesa Park interchange. Also provided for the RMA to develop an overpass at that interchange, and then the frontage roads from that interchange back to Executive Center. As a reminder, this is part of a larger development that is occurring in that area by the Geltmore Development Group. That overall development that Geltmore is pursuing is actually, Geltmore is also pursuing an incentive package from the City of El Paso that would provide for partial financing for the I-10 improvements that the RMA would do. So in essence, what happens is the Geltmore Development Group is pursuing those incentives from the City of El Paso to provide a certain amount of funds for the construction of those I-10 improvements. The remaining funds, which amount to the construction funds, are being pursued by the RMA directly through TxDOT through their pass-through program. The RMA has presented that application to TxDOT, did so I believe it was December, a special meeting in December. That application, or I'm sorry, maybe February. Anyhow, that application was pending with TxDOT, and from the draft Transportation Commission meeting agenda for the end of this month, May 26th, it appears that TxDOT is ready to make awards. Now, we don't know, and I've asked, but we don't know whether or not the RMA's project has been approved or not. However, we'll be keeping tabs on that. So essentially where this project is, we're waiting to hear back from TxDOT on the award of, hopefully, the award of pass-through funds for construction, and then the remaining funds hopefully will come from the City of El Paso's incentive agreement with the developer.
And this was, compared to some of the projects we do, not as big as some of the others. We were looking at a total of around $20 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir. A much smaller project, but a very important one, I think, for the West Side.
Indeed. Any questions?
No, sir.
Are we, just a quick question, and it refers generally to these kinds of proposals, because correct me if I'm wrong, but this may be the first project developed by someone else and then brought to us rather than we pursuing our own projects and saying, look, here's our priorities, 10, 12, 14 projects, the number has changed. This is the first to somebody else coming before us and saying, look here, we're interested in pursuing this.
Well, actually, if you recall, the Spur 601 actually came to us for financing as well. Now, this one's a little bit different because they're actually coming to us not seeking the finance. Well, we will do some financing, but really they're seeking for us to actually construct the project as well as finance it.
Although the Spur 601 was already kind of underway, we sort of inserted ourselves in the process along the way. This one, is this fully understood among RMAs, regulated and all that? I mean, it's well within the scope of it's.
Absolutely.
Okay, fine. Because there might be others in the future. Absolutely. And there may be even larger projects that a developer might come up with and then bring to us.
Absolutely, and in fact, that's part of the education process that the RMA has been involved in. We've had discussions and presentations to all types of industry folks, including designers, builders, and those folks, so that they understand all of the possibilities that the RMA provides to the community. Right. Absolutely.
And as we all know, the Spur 601, we just had the final acceptance and grand opening of the Spur. I think the total is about $360 million project, and that was actually brought to us, and basically we provided the financing to move that project and move it to construction. So the RMA played an important role there. I wasn't part of that. There are a number of the board members here, David, Tony, and Ralph that were. So, it's nice to see something like that go all the way to fruition. So, great job. Mr. Tays, is any action required by the board on this?
No, sir. Subject to your questions, that's all I have for you today.
Okay.
Good job.
Any other questions?
No? Move to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned at 10:41 a.m.